Hello and welcome to part 2 of my Telecaster guitar modifications. Now the next thing I wanted to change was I originally had a single coil pickup in, but I much prefer humbuckers, so I'm going to have to route a new cavity. I took my Les Paul template and then drilled a big hole in the top of my piece of MDF so I could put my router through, and the router bit has a bearing on the bottom so that when I run it around the outside I now have a brand new master humbucker template. I can then mark centre lines and stick this down on my Telecaster, and then use a Forstner bit to roughly hog out most of the material. As you can see, it didn't work that well. Now, the router bit I'm using has a bearing on the top, but the actual cutter on the router bit is extremely long compared to the thickness in my template. This means that unless I wanted to take an extremely deep cut and take out a whole chunk at one time, I'd actually have to do a few shallow cuts freehand and just go as close to the edge as I'd dare. Now that I'd taken out most of the material, I could plunge down so the bearing ran along the template and just take huge chunks out of the side, which is why it sounds rather rough on the router bit. After unsticking the template, there was a small bit that I'd missed with my router bit, probably where I had to do the weird plunging operation. But all I did was take my Dremel and then hold a hoover between my legs so it would suck up all of the horrible dust that blows in your face. And there is the humbucker cavity finished. Now, having routed over the top of the guitar, it had made it a lot thinner than it was, which meant I had to redo some of the curvy parts, like here in the corner where your arm goes across it. This also gave me the opportunity to make the slopey parts a bit bigger, and also add some custom details to the guitar. Now you're probably thinking, oh wow, Jake's finally used the angle grinder without doing something wrong, but no. After that small mishap, I carried on, added some cool curves to the horn here, and then my sanding with the angle grinder was done. Now, as you can see, I've kind of ignored many of the orthodox things you do to a Telecaster by more rounding over the slope in that corner, and also adding a cool detail to the horn, like I have on my custom Les Paul. Once all the rounding and shaping was done, it was time just to sand the top off flat, make it all nice and smooth, and then finish the curves by hand sanding. And after a very long time, my guitar was finally sanded smooth. This meant the guitar was at its finished dimensions, that meant that I had to deepen the neck pocket slightly. And after that, it was on to finishing my first modification. I'd found this strange looking clamp that meant I could clamp the wood down in my router table and still have enough room to move over it. After I'd routed most of it off to a thin thickness, I could simply use a normal clamp because I had a lot more room to just route off the final edge. I then made sure that I marked which way was up after I turned it round in my router table and test fitted the cover. It was so tight that I had to bang it out from the humbucker on the other side. Now it's time to glue it in. I put normal Titebond glue around the ledge and then pressed the cover on top of it. Because it was a very tight fit, I had to go around and bang it in with a mallet and a piece of wood just to make sure it went in and fit properly. To fill up any gaps, I then squirted some more Titebond glue into the gaps, and then rubbed sawdust into the glue. After rubbing it in as tightly as I could, I blew off the sawdust and checked the final appearance. It looked pretty good, which meant I could turn the guitar over, press it down onto the table, and then clamp it down by simply putting a heavy weight on the other side. After the glue had dried for 24 hours, I could mount the guitar in my router table for a final time, and route off the control cover so it was flush with the rest of the body. You can see by where some of the wood stain has been removed that the back of the guitar isn't entirely flat. I would have liked to have routed over the entire thing so it was flat, but then the cover for the electronics control cavity wouldn't have fit properly, which meant I just had to sand it all by hand. Now you can see that there are still some gaps around the outside of my cover, so what I do is squirt some glue using the great nozzle on the Titebond bottle as deep into the gaps as I can, and then all you do is take a sanding block and sand over the top so that again the dust you create fills in the gaps and goes hard with the glue. Now that that looks good, it was time to finish off the repair I've done on the control cavity. I'd stuck this block in for extra support, and now to finish it off I'm going to fill it with glue, and then pour a load of sawdust on top. This means that the glue is going to set extremely hard into the gaps, and then when I sand it off a final time, it would be like a strong and solid piece of wood. Now where I'd stuck the block in the way, I of course needed to re-drill my hole for the switch. There's that done. And now structurally, the body and the neck of my Telecaster are completely finished. So now it is just a matter of constantly sanding it. It's a good idea to use a sanding block when doing the top and back so that you get a perfect flat finish. And after I'd sanded with 80 grit, I wiped it off with white spirit to remove any dust that built up in the grain, and then I always keep it on some rag so it never gets dented on the table. And now at this stage I use the 80 grit and then stop after doing 120. Now the only work that's left to do on the neck is to sand off the sharp edges from the edge of the fret wire. I use this block of wood to run the small needle file along it. If I want to bevel over the side of the frets, all I do is move the block to the side and continue running along it. This way, I'm never going to fall off the frets and I can file as accurately as I like. This is the best method I've found to removing the sharp edges. However, it's never going to be perfect because the actual sharp edge is underneath the top of the fret wire where I haven't pressed it into the fretboard deep enough. At this stage, it's basically impossible to fix, so I just have to put up with it. But next time, remember to make sure all of the fret wire goes in perfectly flush with the fretboard. So to completely finish the neck, all I had to do was finish sand it. Here is a very special piece of apparently 120 grit sandpaper. As you can see, it's grey on the back instead of brown like most bits of sandpaper, and gives such a smooth finish that I believe it's special polishing paper from an engineering firm that I can't seem to buy anywhere. After I sand with this, which is 120, I go all the way straight to 1200, because 120 grit polishing paper preps it so well that these are the only two bits I need. The 1200 grit normal wet and dry paper appear to have bits of varnish left over, or maybe it's the fact that I can get this beech neck so smooth that the neck actually goes smooth and shiny without having to apply any varnish or polish. The natural wood finish with mildly indented bits of sanded varnish are the perfect finish for my neck, so now all I need to do is put the tuners on and wait for the body to be painted. I actually know someone that sprays cars for a business, so for the next video you'll see me using a proper spray gun and probably destroying the perfectly good piece of wood. I'll see you then. Please like, share and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for watching, guys.